12-year-old girl unalived her entire family so she could be with her 23-year-old boyfriend. Jasmine Richardson was a normal kid until she turned 11 years old. She started dressing in a darker aesthetic, liking some darker things. She would post on websites like MySpace and VampireFreaks.com, telling people she was 15 instead of 11. Because the thing about Jasmine is even though she was 11, she didn't look 11. She always kind of looked older than she actually was. She started sneaking out to hang out with her new older friends and would meet older guys. By the time that Jasmine was 12 years old, she was in a full-on relationship with this freak, 23-year-old Jeremy. And just so you know, just because she was lying about her age on social media, this guy was fully aware that his girlfriend was 12 years old, a literal preteen, and he would also tell people that he was a 300-year-old werewolf. So for context, we are dealing with a full-on freak. Jasmine's parents were horrified when they found out that their 12-year-old daughter was online telling people that she was older than she actually was and that she was dating a full-on adult, so they did their best to keep Jeremy away. Jasmine and Jeremy didn't want to be apart, and they thought that the only way that they could be together is if Jasmine's parents were no longer alive. What started out as jokes became real plans to not only unalive Jasmine's parents, but her 8-year-old brother as well. On April 22nd, 2006, Jasmine secretly let Jeremy into her home where he brutally unalived her parents. Jasmine's 8-year-old brother, Jacob, heard the entire thing while hiding in his room holding his lightsaber for protection. It's like heart-shattering. It's unclear who actually unalived 8-year-old Jacob because Jasmine and Jeremy blame each other for his death. Jasmine and Jeremy thought that they were soulmates, and now with her parents out of the picture, they were going to be together forever. But in reality, that was not the case. They were actually quickly brought to justice because they were bragging to anyone that would listen about what they had just done to her entire family. And of course, as soon as they were arrested, the soulmates turned on each other. Jeremy was sentenced to 3 life sentences, but due to Jasmine's age, she only served 6 years in a rehabilitation center and 4 years on probation. She was fully released into society in 2017 and has been out living in society free as a bird ever since under a new name. Actually, a lot of controversy in this case because of that, but what do you think? Do you think Jasmine is a victim, a child manipulated by a predator, or do you think if she's old enough to do the crime, she's old enough to do the time?
This girl killed her mum and then texted a photo of her body to her dad. In 2013, Rachel Hudson and her family were supposed to be celebrating Thanksgiving at their home in Virginia. However, the holiday would take a horrendously sinister turn. Rachel's mum was terminally ill 58-year-old Susan Lee. Rachel had been her mum's carer since she was just 9 years old. On the evening in question, Rachel and her dad got into an argument. When her dad left the house the next day to make the most of the Black Friday sales, Rachel did something unthinkable. She took a weapon out of the wardrobe and loaded it. She apparently thought about unaliving herself at this point, but she didn't want to put her mum through the trauma of finding her body. She then walked into the room where her mum was and said, "I'm sorry, this is what has to happen." Her mum apparently told her, "You're crazy," and this is the point where Rachel killed her mum. When she texted her dad to break the news to him, he obviously didn't believe what she was saying. She then took a photo of her mum's body and texted it over to her dad. Rachel was sentenced initially to 50 years in prison, but this was reduced to 18 years because of an apparent undiagnosed mental illness.
This is Miss Pac-Man, one of the worst videos on the internet explained. The video that I'm about to explain is about 1 minute long and it starts in a dark room. And the first thing you notice is the screaming in the background. The camera then pans to the floor revealing a severed hand, and it then pans to the bed which Alejandro Eco Chubb is on. The bed was soaked in blood and Alejandro had both of her hands cut off, and at this point you can see the full extent of her injuries. Alejandra had been hit in the face so hard with a machete that she had a horizontal wound going across her face that was so deep it actually reached her ears. The wound was halfway up her face, right in the middle of her nose, and it was horizontal, hence the name of the video, Miss Pac-Man. Because the wound was so deep it looked like an exaggerated mouth. But the disturbing thing is, Alejandra is still alive, and at this point you discover the screaming in the background isn't her, but actually someone else in the house, and according to rumors and reports, it's actually her children. The camera then pans to her face and it shows she is still aware and conscious. Her eyes moving across the room in complete pain and fear. You hear her struggling to breathe due to the insane amount of blood, And you hear constant gurgling as she tries to hang on to her life. You also hear her try to breathe, but due to the injury, it's extremely muffled. It almost sounds like a young baby crying. You also hear a male's voice behind the camera. Now, the question is this the neighbors who discovered her? And if it is, why in the world are they recording her? Or was it her partner who was responsible for this brutal murder? The camera stays on Alejandro's face for about 30 to 40 seconds, and you see her withering in pain. You hear her trying to scream, and at one point the camera goes closer to her wound, and at this point you see just how deep the wound really is. It's literally 3/4 of the way through her head. This is a very hard watch. You don't see the awful act committed on camera, but seeing the aftermath is traumatizing. Alejandro was pronounced dead after this video was taken. This video is considered one of the worst, and its brutality is compared to Funky Town, 3 Guys, 1 Hammer, and much more. Nobody knows how this video ended up on the internet, and it remains a mystery. Whatever you do, don't go searching for the video or picture. It's way different than a regular cartel video, and it's more of a real-life horror video. A complete living nightmare for those in the room. Trust me, it will mess you up completely. Rest in peace to Alejandro Eco Chubb. This is absolutely sickening, and I can't believe people who do stuff like this exist.
This girl was killed by the last person anyone would suspect. On the 8th of March 2020, Brittany Ulacki shouted to her dad James, "I'll beat you home." Brittany had just been watching her dad play in a band and had organised a lift home with her best friend. The friend in question was 18-year-old Bryce Dickey. Brittany and Bryce were so close that she actually referred to him as her big brother. Brittany was 16 years old and Bryce was always there for her and her family. However, that day, far from beating her dad home, she would actually never turn up. Brittany and her family lived in Nevada. The area had a safe community feel, and Brittany's dad trusted Bryce to get his daughter home safe. However, as time ticked on, James got really worried. He sent several texts to his daughter trying to see when she was due home. He also tried to call her but got no response. When investigators got involved, they interviewed 18-year-old Bryce. All they knew was he was the last reported person to have seen her. Now, at the time, he reported being equally concerned about her whereabouts. He told police that they'd driven round for 3.5 hours before he dropped her off at Spring Creek High School. He said that she told him she was meeting up with a new friend. Unfortunately, he didn't know who this was. He last saw her getting into a green pickup truck, and he reportedly saw a white tall male in a cowboy hat. He told police that he was so concerned he'd sent several Snapchat messages to Brittany, but she hadn't responded. Then on the 11th of March, a terrible discovery was made. Brittany's body was found. She'd been wrapped in tarpaulin and there was evidence that she'd been AR'd before she was killed. Bryce expressed his sorrow on social media. He referred to her as sis and wrote, "We love you so much, just know that you won't ever be forgotten." Things started to unfold, however, when Bryce gave a DNA sample. Now, prior to this, Bryce had told police that his and Brittany's relationship was completely platonic. However, after the DNA sample, it was clear that Bryce had had sexual contact with Brittany. He then decided to change his story. He said that he had been physical with Brittany, but this was nothing to do with the murder. However, when police searched his house, they found blood-stained boots and he was arrested. It became clear that he had made up the story of the pickup truck and the male in the cowboy hat. At his trial, he was found guilty of first-degree murder and he got life.
17-year-old Carolyn Watson and 22-year-old Julian Buchwald were avid churchgoers living in Melbourne, Australia, and had been dating about 2 years by the time this insane story takes place. In March 2008, Julian set up a romantic picnic in the Australian countryside where his family owned a bunch of land. As they were driving, Julian saw a dead animal on the side of the road and pulled over to check it out. It's weird, sure, but apparently this wasn't abnormal for him. He would see weird things on the side of the road and pull over all the time. Boys are gross, I don't know. As he was out of the car, he felt a blunt object hit the back of his head. Carolyn was still in the car and couldn't see where Julian went. After about 5 minutes of waiting on him, she was about to get out and investigate when she saw a man in a mask running towards her. He dragged her out of the car, hogtied her, gagged her, and threw her in the trunk. Later that afternoon, Julian's parents received a note that said the kidnapping was a revenge against them and to not call the cops or they'd never see the couple again. Specifically, it said, "We'll F the girl to death and burn her alive and torture the bloody boy." Obviously, they called the cops anyway, and searches began immediately. After 6 hours of driving, the attacker pulls Carolyn out of the trunk, takes his knife, and rips off her clothes. She then starts to hear him dig a hole. Can you imagine how scary it would be to be blindfolded and naked and hear your kidnapper start to dig a hole? She was certain that she was about to be raped and either stabbed to death or buried alive. But all of a sudden, the noise stops and she hears him walk away. After a while of being petrified and alone, she hears a faint voice whispering her name, and it was Julian. He had woken up from being knocked out, and she didn't even know he was right there. He was also tied up, but luckily he was not blindfolded, and he saw that the attacker left his knife. So he shimmied over to it, cut himself out, and cut Carolyn out too. Assuming this guy was coming back, they take the knife and the backpack, which had a little food in it, and they bolt. They're in the middle of the wilderness, both naked, completely lost, and they wander around like that for nearly a week. They change hiding spots every day to better their chances that the attackers won't find them. The days are scorching hot, but the nights are freezing, so the conditions are not great and their food is running out. But luckily, after a week of this, they find the main road and a farmer is driving by and picks them up. They were dangerously sunburned and had blisters covering their body, but they were alive and safe. Obviously, their families are ecstatic to be reunited with them, and cops are determined to find whoever did this. They drive the 6 hours to the remote area where Carolyn and Julian were dumped in hopes that evidence would still be there, and it was. They found the rope used to tie them up, duct tape, and a shovel, and they were able to trace back who those items belonged to. Ready for it? They all belonged to Julian. Yep, he staged the whole thing. He planted the dead animal on the side of the road as an excuse to stop, but really, he was changing into a mask, gloves, in order to kidnap his own girlfriend. And the reason why he did this? In hopes that the night would be so cold, she would have sex with them in order to stay warm. You see, they had vowed to wait till marriage, but I guess he couldn't wait any longer, and he thought the best way for her to lose her virginity was to be tricked into thinking that her life depended on it. The good news, though, it didn't work because she still said no. If you like true crime stories with the plot twist like this one, head over to our podcast, People Are the Worst. We are all about a shocking turn of events, and we guarantee at least one per episode.
As long as was needed to complete the work. The youngest daughter, Kyla, had gone to bed at 9 p.m., but Billy stayed up with the older two sisters till 1 a.m., helping them finish their schoolwork. Afterwards, they all headed to bed to get some much-needed rest, and Billy had turned on his CPAP breathing machine that he used to keep his sleep apnea at bay before drifting to sleep. Strangely, just 2 hours later, he was awoken by something. Still half asleep, Billy went to check on his daughters. Amanda's door was shut, and he concluded that perhaps she was the one who turned on the hall light. Maybe she'd gotten up in the middle of the night for a drink of water. The other bedroom door was open, and he saw his two younger girls fast asleep in their beds. With his mind more at ease, he returned to his bed, put his breathing machine back on, and quickly fell back to sleep. The following morning, at 6 a.m., Billy was awoken by the blaring of his alarm clock. He later stated that during those intermittent hours of sleep, he dreamed about the rapture. In his dream, Jesus had returned to take his followers home. He explained that in his dream, he saw Amanda being taken and him being left behind, with her saying the words, "Bye, Daddy," to him. Still feeling jarred from his intense dream, he quickly left his bed to check on his daughters. He was overwhelmed with relief when he saw his two younger girls still sleeping peacefully in their beds. But his comfort was short-lived. As he tried to open Amanda's door, it was caught on the open closet door behind it. After using force to get through the door, he witnessed an unbearable sight. Amanda's body was lying limp on her bed. When he went to touch her, she was ice cold, and he knew that his nightmare had come true. He then covered her and, still in a state of shock, dialed 911. Within minutes, paramedics from the fire department arrived at the scene, but their life-saving gear was useless. Amanda was, indeed, gone. Jason Dillon from the Rock Hill Fire Department asked Billy what he thought had happened, and Billy told him that he thought she may have choked on her blanket as she had a history of rolling in her sleep. Detectives arrived soon after and secured the house as an active crime scene and began an investigation. The detectives were immediately suspicious of Billy's reaction to his daughter's death. His calm demeanor seemed unnatural, and he did not display much emotion at all. Soon, dozens of investigators filled the tiny house looking for clues, but the house was a mess, with the family's belongings cluttering every room. There were clothes piled on every surface, dishes overflowing out of the sinks, cockroaches scurrying into the corners. In the midst of this, Amanda's body lay fully clothed on her bed, surrounded by her books and recent school pictures that she'd just gotten back from the photographer. When the body was examined, investigators found that she'd been beaten and strangled to death after being assaulted. There were bruises on her body, and physical evidence was found on her clothes. The evidence was collected in the hopes that it could be used in identifying the killer. While processing the house for clues, police found another oddity.